All right, so are you ready to dive into this whole power thing? We got these excerpts from tribal leaders to kings, and looks like we're going to go way back to like when humans were in tribes, and then like how they ended up building pyramids and empires and all that. It's kind of wild, right? How do we go from sharing to like conquering?
Well, it's really interesting because, like, for most of human history, power wasn't about, like, money or fancy titles or anything like that. It was just about surviving.
Yeah, the book makes that super clear. Like early tribes, they chose their leaders based on like whoever was the best person for whatever they needed to do. So like if there's a saber-toothed tiger about to attack, you probably want like the biggest, strongest warrior in charge.
Oh, yeah.
Makes sense to me.
Exactly. Or say you need to, like, track a herd of animals that are migrating. Then all of a sudden, the person who knows the stars and the seasons is the most important.
Okay.
Pretty different from how we choose leaders these days, huh?
Can you imagine if your boss changed every week depending on what project you're working on?
Yeah.
That would be, well, pretty crazy.
Yeah. But it does show you how different our idea of leadership is now compared to back then. Like, they cared about getting things done and being able to change. But then, of course, things changed when people started farming.
Right, because then people could settle down and grow crops, and all of a sudden they had extra food.
Yeah.
And that's when things started getting, well, a little less friendly, I guess.
Yeah, it's a huge change.
Yeah.
Once you have more than you need, you start thinking about who owns what. And it's not about who's the best hunter anymore. It's about who controls the most land and food. That's when you start to see inequality happening.
So, like, imagine you're in one of these early farming villages, and someone just puts up a fence and says, nope, this is all mine. You can't have any. I bet people weren't too happy about that.
Probably not. The book says that this is when humans start coming up with stories and myths and rituals to try to make it seem okay that some people have more than others.
It's like the first PR campaign, right? Convince people that it's just natural for some to rule and others to follow, and there you go. You've got a system.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. And it gets even more complicated when we get to the first civilizations and they have kings.
Okay, so kings. Kings and pyramids, right?
Right, like in Mesopotamia and Egypt, huge buildings, complex societies, and this really smart move they made, connecting the king to the gods.
Ah, the divine right of kings. So you can't question the king because then you're questioning the gods. Smart way to keep people from disagreeing with you. It kind of reminds me of how people treat celebrities and influencers today. Like we put them on a pedestal and think they know everything. Do you see any connection there?
That is interesting. It seems like humans always need to believe in someone or something bigger than themselves, even if who that is changes over time. But even though this divine right thing might seem like just a way to grab power, the book also says it did make things more stable. Imagine if there were always power struggles and people fighting for the throne every other week. That wouldn't be good for anyone.
I see your point. Sometimes people want order, even if it means giving up some freedom. So, okay, we've got the king at the top of this pyramid chosen by the gods. So who's below him?
Well, it's like a really strict company structure, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
You've got priests and nobles, then people who sell things and make things, then farmers, and then sadly at the very bottom, slaves. No moving up the ladder in that system. And this whole pyramid of power is what they called it in the book. It lasted for centuries.
That's crazy. Why do you think people stayed in line? Were they scared of the gods, or was there something else going on? I can't imagine everyone was happy with this system, right?
That's a good question. Why do people accept systems that don't really benefit them? It's something to think about. And we'll talk more about that later. But first, things are going to get even more permanent with the rise of dynasties.
Dynasties, yeah.
Because, like, why have one king when you could have a whole bunch of Ellerms, right?
Haha. No, it's kind of funny when you think about it. Like, today we think nepotism is a bad thing. But that's basically how all these early kingdoms worked. Just pass the crown down to your kid and boom, you're all set.
Yeah, it seems simple, but the book says it didn't always mean you had good leaders.
Yeah. History's full of stories about kings who, like, got the throne because their dad was king and they just totally messed everything up. So, like, why do you think this whole passing down the crown thing lasted for so long?
That's a tough one. Maybe it goes back to what we were saying about how people just want things to be stable and predictable. Even if the king wasn't that great, at least there was like a system in place. And can you imagine the chaos if every time a king died, everyone started fighting over who would be the next one?
Yikes. Yeah, I guess it's like better the devil you know sometimes. But the book doesn't just stop at kings and dynasties. It also talks about empires. Like going from one kingdom to controlling a ton of different places. That's a pretty big change.
It is. Like, think about the Assyrians, the Persians, the Romans, these huge empires. They had to figure out totally new ways to be in charge. You can't just be like, I'm king because the gods said so, when you're trying to rule over millions of people all over the place.
It's like going from running a little shop to being in charge of a giant company overnight. Like, how did they even handle that?
They kind of had to invent new ways. The book talks about how empires like Rome obviously had strong armies, but they also built all these roads and aqueducts, these amazing systems to connect everything and everyone.
Those roads are almost like the internet of ancient times, right?
Yeah.
Connecting people and spreading information and goods.
That's a great way to think about it. And just like the internet today, those Roman roads could be used to spread propaganda too.
Oh, yeah, good old propaganda, telling everyone the emperor is like a god and all that. It all sounds pretty similar to what we see today with social media and advertising, don't you think?
Definitely. The methods might be different, but the goal is the same, to get people to think a certain way.
So the book says that even though these empires were powerful and came up with cool new things, they had one big problem. They got too big.
Wait, so you're saying that being big was actually a bad thing for them?
Yeah. As they got bigger, it was harder to communicate and keep everyone happy, and there were always people trying to rebel on the edges of the empire. It just became too much to handle.
So is there like a perfect size for any group that's in charge, like whether it's an empire or a company or even a government? Is there a point where getting bigger stops being a good thing?
That's a really interesting question, and it's something we're still trying to figure out today as the world gets more and more connected. Are there some organizations that are just too big to fail, or are they, like you said, maybe too big not to fail? But before we get too lost in today's world, the book takes us to another really important time in history, the Age of Revolutions.
Okay, the 18th century. Revolutions, lots of changes. So this is when people started thinking about power in a totally different way. Right? Exactly. People like John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, they said, wait a minute, power shouldn't come from God or your family, it should come from the people.
That's where the whole power to the people idea comes from. No wonder there were revolutions in America and France. People were tired of kings who didn't care about them.
Yep. These revolutions weren't just about getting rid of one king and putting another one in his place. They were about changing where power comes from. They wanted to completely change this pyramid of power we've been talking about.
So the kings are gone. Monarchies are replaced with republics. They write new constitutions. Sounds like democracy wins.
Well, it's not that simple. These revolutions definitely change things, but just because you have new systems doesn't mean the problems with power disappear. Like the book says, even without kings and emperors, you still need someone to be in charge, right?
I see what you mean. So what happens next in this whole power story?
Well, as we move into the Industrial Revolution, we see a new group of powerful people, the ones who control the factories and resources and money in this new economy.
So now it's not about land or being a king anymore. It's all about factories and railroads and oil. Like, the whole game changed.
It really did. You could even say that the Industrial Revolution made like a new kind of royalty. You know, the super rich industrialists, the ones who controlled everything and have tons of money, they were like the new kings in a way.
And their power didn't come from God or armies or anything. It came from controlling how things were made. Whoever had the factories and resources and all the stuff people needed, they were the ones with the real power.
Exactly. And then as we get closer to the 20th century, things shift again. Now information becomes really important for having power. If you control the information, you can control what people think and what they do.
It's like the game got even bigger and the rules changed again. Now it's not just about physical stuff anymore. It's about data and algorithms and being able to influence people's minds.
And the book actually kind of saw this coming, even though it was written before the internet and all that. It's like the author could tell that information was going to be the next big thing for power. It's kind of like, I don't know, like standing on the edge of something brand new and not knowing what's going to happen next.
And here we are today, living in that digital world that the book could only imagine. We've got these huge tech companies like Google and Facebook. They don't have armies or wear crowns, but they have so much influence. It's almost kind of funny, right? We spent centuries trying to get rid of kings and emperors, and now we're basically giving our information and attention to these big tech companies.
It's definitely complicated, but, the book ends on a hopeful note. It says that even though the internet has some problems, it also gives people more power in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's true. Like, think about it. We have access to so much information now. It's amazing. And we can connect with people all over the world and organize and speak out against things we don't like.
Right. We see it happening all the time. People using social media to expose injustice and hold powerful people accountable. Our ancestors could never have imagined that. So maybe this whole digital age actually gives us a chance to change how power works.
That'd be incredible.
Yeah.
But it's also a big responsibility for all of us. We know how powers have been used in the past,
Yep.
but now it's up to us to decide what happens next.
The book ends by asking, what story will we write next? And I think that's a great question to think about, because the answer is really up to each of us. How will we use this power we have? What choices will we make?
From tribes to tweets, the story of power is still being written. And you listening right now, you're part of that story. So go out there, write your own story, and remember, knowledge is power, but it's action that really changes things. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.